Cheryl McQueen, designer with Bello's Designs. This video tutorial features the wonderful Sweet Poppy Stencil's Pumpkin Stencil and uses a smooshing technique to create the background. Here are the supplies that I'll be using today. I will be using a Lavinia Multifarious Smooth and Supreme cardstock. This one is cut to 6.5 inches by 4.5 inches. We'll be doing a frame for around the edge of our artwork here. This one is just a cut from a piece of cardstock and is cut to 6 3/4 inches by 4 3/4 inches. For my card base, I took a piece of cardstock and cut it down to be 10 inches by 7 inches, and then I just folded it in half. The stencil that we're going to be using today is the latest stencil from Sweet Poppy Stencils. It is the Pumpkins stencil, and this is what it looks like. This one is SP1356. We will also be using the Tim Holtz inks. I've got a number of them that I'm using, but to create the background, we are going to use the dried marigold, the bundled sage, and the ground espresso. And then when we begin working on stenciling, we will be using a couple of shades of the oranges. I've got the carved pumpkin, the spiced marmalade, and the wild honey. And for our leaves, we will use the mowed lawn and the pine needles. Then we'll do a little bit of shadowing with the brushed corduroy and the black soot. I will be using blending brushes, or you can use stencil brushes as well to create the pumpkins. And I'll also be using the Lavinia Stencil Brush Series, the 1/4 inch size. We do have one little sentiment that I have done. This one is just, I've got a bunch of little sentiments that I've had for fall, and I'm just going to use the Hello Fall stamp off of that little set. I also like to put my stencil down on the magnetic sheet that Sweet Poppy has. If you have a pacemaker, you don't need to use this. I know you're probably well aware that you don't need to be using magnetic things. So you can just tape this down, or you can use the magnetic sheet to help stabilize your stencil down. And I'll show you both ways on that today. We'll go ahead and use a couple of small daubers as well to do a little bit of our finer details. And then I have done a little bit of grounding by drawing in some grass, so I will be using just a little fine tip black pen to be doing that. When we are stabilizing our stencils down, I like to use something like the Sweet Poppy low-tack tape or a low-tack painter's tape, and that's just because I don't want it to be shifting around while I'm working, and that's just something that I do. You don't have to, but it just helps a little bit to keep it from shifting around. We'll also be using some water to create our smooshing technique, and then as I put my card together, I'll probably go ahead and just use the adhesive tape. I love the running tape because it's quick when I'm doing demonstrations, but you can also use a paper glue, craft glue that you might have on hand. All right, so let's get started working on our project. So to start our project off, we are going to start with the background. We will be using the marigold, dried marigold color, the bundled sage, and the ground espresso to create that background. I call it the smooshing technique. I don't know what it's called by most people, but that's what I like to call it. And so basically what we're going to do with that is we're going to put our inks down, add some water, and actually smoosh our card on top of that surface. So let's go ahead and scoot this over just a little bit so that you'll be able to see a little bit more of my working space. We're going to start out by using the white cardstock, the multifarious. Then I'm going to start with the dried marigold color first. What I'm going to do is just put a little bit of that color down on my work surface. And then I'm going to spritz it with water. Then basically just literally do what the name of the technique that I call smooshing, and do that, and just lay your card down, smoosh it around, pick up some of the color. You're just going to get a varying amount of color down on your cardstock. You can rub it around if you'd like to. And then what I like to do is take my drying or my heat tool and go ahead and dry it up just a little bit. If you have spots that you don't like, that you think are a little too dark, you can always dab them up just a little bit with your paper towel. So just dry that up just a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit more ink down. Alright, now I'm just going to go ahead and move on to the bundled sage. I may end up coming back and adding some more of this. And you obviously, with this particular process, you're never going to get the same look twice. It is always a very free-flowing type of process. Spritz some more water on our bundled sage. And then just doing the same thing. Just wiping and swiping and getting some color onto our card. Add a little bit more. And sometimes I like to go ahead and leave those spots that are a little bit darker. Kind of adds a little bit of interest. And you can just add and go along until you get your background to be the way that you really think that it should look for you. This nice part about this particular process is that it's pretty much subjective. It's up to what you like in the end for your background to look like. Add a little bit more bundled sage. Let's see, maybe some here at the top. Yeah, some over here on the side. You might not be able to see it quite as clearly on the camera because it is a lighter background. I chose these lighter colors because I don't want them to overwhelm my stencil when I actually start working on putting that down. Alright, let's do one or two little more spots of that before we put in just a touch of our ground espresso. I don't want a whole lot of the brown, but I do like a little bit of it in there to give it some contrast. All right. Oh, there we go. I think that looks really interesting. Let's do a little bit more up here at the top. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I'll clean up that color a little bit. And then I'm just going to do a very, very little bit of the ground espresso. Just going to put just a few little dabs and dips, maybe a little more water on that. maybe just a little bit on the side over here. You can always use a little bit lighter brown if you don't want it quite as dark, or just add a lot more water. Again, I like to have a little bit of the contrast and the neat looking little spots that show up when we do this process. All right. Now, I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and wipe up my surface so that I don't get it all over everything. And then give just a last little hit with drying it up. All right. Now, one of the things that I like to do is I like to have it look like it will sort of blend all in together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bundled sage and a blending brush. And I'm just going to lightly go over the entire surface of my card. And to me, basically what this does is it brings all the colors together. It just kind of makes it softer to me and gives that finished look of everything going together instead of being separate little spots of color. This just kind of just pulls it all together to me. Whenever I do this, I usually try to go ahead and pick out one of the lighter colors, because you don't want it to be super obvious that you've put another color on. You just want it to blend it and make it look nice and soft and pretty. All right, and there's our background. If you look at this at it and decide, I need a little something like down here, to me that's just a little bit too brown. So I think I'm going to take the dried marigold and just touch a little bit into that spot, giving it just a little bit less of the big brown spot. So let's see if we can't get that to even out just a little bit, tone it down just a little bit. There we go. That kind of blends in a little bit more with the color there, even though it's still a little bit sharp. Okay, so now we are ready to go ahead and move on to doing our stenciling part. Okay, to start doing the stenciling part, I'm going to go ahead and set up how I want to do this. I'm going to go ahead and scooch this over just a little bit more, so that since we won't be needing our white surface as much. So what I'm going to start out by doing is I'm going to block off the part that I don't want. On this particular size of card, I don't want this top leaf and flower. And so the easiest way to do that is to just take some tape and kind of go in there and cover up, let's see, some areas, there we go, that you're not going to want your ink to go through. So I'm just going to put some tape down there. And cover those spots up. Looks like I might need just a tiny little piece right there on the edge. So that's all I've done, is just covered up the parts that I'm not going to want on this particular card. Now, one of the things that I like to do is use the magnetic sheet to put my stencils down on. But you don't have to do that if you have either, like I said earlier, the pacemaker, or for some other reason you don't want to use that, or you don't have it, that's fine. You can just tape it down to your surface to stabilize it. I like to use the magnetic card sheet, so I'm going to do that. And first thing I'm going to do is line up where I want my stenciling to be. And sometimes what I'll do, and I'm not going to raise the camera so you can see this, but I'm going to hold it up to the light and see if I can get it exactly centered where I want it on my piece of cardstock. You can kind of see through it that way. And then if you get that to the place that you really like it and want to make sure that it doesn't wiggle around too much, take a piece of your tape and just tape it down on the back to stabilize the card a little bit more. That's the nice thing about using the magnetic sheet, if you're able to, is that it will also hold it in place and keep it from moving around too much. So then I'm just going to lay that down with it being centered where I like for it to be. Now I have a little bit of edging showing, and unfortunately sometimes I get a little carried away, so I don't want to get ink on my edge of my card where I don't want it, so I'm just going to put a little piece of tape over that as well so that I don't go into an area I don't want it to go. So what we're going to start out doing is we're going to take the carved pumpkin and we're just going to cover up the entire pumpkin area. You know, I'm trying to decide. I think I want my pumpkins facing the other direction, so I'm just going to flip that over. Now, I think I like that facing that direction. You can. That's the nice thing about this stencil. Obviously, you can have your pumpkins on whichever side you prefer. I want my big pumpkin on the left. So I'm going to take my carved pumpkin, and I'm just going to go all over the entire surface of where my two pumpkins are. Now, if you're worried that you're going to get over into this, you can also tape that off. I've done that before, where I'll just take a little piece of tape and kind of cover up that area. You know, if you get wild and crazy like I do sometimes when I'm doing my stenciling, my brush will go over into areas where I don't want it to go. That's also a very simple process to just cover up that little bit that you don't want to get the wrong color on. Okay. And once you get the carved pumpkin down to be the color that you want on there, get just a little bit more up here at the top. Then we'll go ahead and move on to getting a little bit of shadowing in there. And I love how the background kind of comes through and still shows up because it gives it a really unique look. So now we're going to take the wild honey. And I think I forgot to show you this before. This is the Lavinia stencil brush. This is in the series 3, and this is only 1/4 inch. I like this size because I can do small areas very easily with it. So we're taking the wild honey first. We're going to just do that on the bigger pumpkin, and basically what I'm going to do is just take that color and run it along the edge. Just to get some darker color. And then I'm going to do the same thing on each little section of the pumpkin. And I'm just doing it closest to the left-hand edge on this particular side. And then on my middle piece, I'm going to do it on both sides and come down just a little bit into the pumpkin area. Right there at the very top. And then when I get to the right hand side, I'm just going to do it on the right hand edge of the little section of the pumpkin. Okay, so that just starts helping to give it just a little bit of dimension there. A little bit of shape. Okay, and now I'm going to move on to the smaller pumpkin, and with that I'm going to use the spiced marmalade. And we're going to do basically the same thing. On the left hand side of the pumpkin, we'll just do a little bit on the left part of each section. We get to the middle, and we'll do it on both sides and then bring it down just a little bit into the center. Then on the right hand side, just do it on the right part of the section of the pumpkin. And then we'll add just a little bit right on the kind of top edges of the little sections that are kind of at the back of the pumpkin. Okay, so now it's starting to give a little bit of dimensionality. So we're going to move on to doing a little bit of the brushed corduroy. Here, let me kind of wipe off my little brush here just a little bit. There we go. We're going to use the brushed corduroy, and we're going to do that on the bottom edges. That gives it just a little bit more of a shadowed look. Since the pumpkin is sitting down on the ground, the pumpkins are needing to be looking like that's the shadow from them sitting on the ground. So we're just going to take a little bit, and you can bring it up a tiny little bit if you'd like to. But we're going to concentrate on the bottom part of the pumpkins. Alright, so there we go. We're giving our pumpkins that just a little bit more dimensionality. Okay, so I think I want to make this pumpkin go ahead and have its stem be a little bit more on the brown side. So I will go ahead and take this brushed corduroy and just add it to where the stem is. I'm trying to make it a little darker down at the base, and then go a little bit lighter as we get to the top of the stem. And then I'm going to put just a very, very tiny little bit of hair of the brushed corduroy, since the pumpkin dips down there in the middle around the stem. So that gives it a little bit more of the shadowing again. Alright, so now we are ready to go ahead and move on to our leaves. So I'm going to try and get as much of the browns and oranges off of my stencil brush. And I'm going to remove my little pieces of tape here so that I can expose the areas that I want green. Now again, doesn't matter if you want to do this or not, but I like to, because again, I don't want to get the green too much on my pumpkin, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to actually cut just a little bit of a curve out of it here. Actually, I should have done it the other direction. But we'll just kind of cover up where my pumpkin is so I don't get green on it. And grab another little piece for just right there. Alright, that'll just again keep the green from getting onto the orange part. Same process. I'm going to start out with my brush and cover the entire area of my leaf. Just kind of put down a little base green. Now if you want to, I've done this little piece right here like a leaf, done the leaf color, but I think it probably is just another little flowering part of the pumpkin. You can always do that a different color and make it look more like a flower than leaves. I've just decided this time to just have it be leaves. So now we've kind of got our little lighter color of green down as our base green. And then while I've got that out, I'm going to go ahead and do some green on my stem. Now we're going to take our darker green and add a little bit of shading on our leaves. So I'm just going to try and go close to the center of the leaves. To add that little bit of shadowing. And I'm just going to kind of randomly put just a little bit on my tendril that's coming out right there. All right, and move on to our leaves over here. The same process. Might put just a little bit of dark on the tip there. Alright, and now I'm going to go ahead and put just a little bit of the dark onto my stem as well, down closer to the base of it. We want that to also look like it's kind of tucked just a little bit down inside the part of the pumpkin there. Alright, so let's go ahead and remove our tape and take a look at that. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So let's go ahead and remove the stencil. Alright, now we're ready to move on and do a few more details on our pumpkins before we move on to putting on the sentiment. Alright, so now we want to go ahead and add just a little bit more dimension. So we're going to take a little bit of the black soot and just put it down underneath the pumpkins to give them a little bit of grounding so that it looks like they are actually sitting on the ground. So I'm just going to take a little bit of black soot and just gently brush it underneath my pumpkins. To just give them the appearance that they're sitting on the ground with a little shadowing. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit under the leaf as well, since it's resting on the ground. And maybe just a little bit under this leaf as well. Alright, so now it doesn't look like we've got floating pumpkins. But I also like to ground it just a tiny little bit more by adding just a little grass and ground sketching. So I just take my very fine tip black pen and just kind of draw a little line and then add some grass sprigs in various places. Again, this just to me gives it a little bit more of the appearance that it's actually sitting on the ground. Do a few around the leaves as well. And then maybe just dash a few of them in a few other various little places. Alright, so now that doesn't look like our pumpkins are just floating around in the air. And that's basically all we need to do before we add our sentiment. So I'm going to grab my stamping platform. And place my card down on that. You can probably see I've got a sticky grid that I've placed down. That way I don't have to worry about using magnets, and it will stay in place for me. So the sentiment that I have today is Hello Fall. So I'm going to take out my little Hello Fall. If I can find where to open it, there it is. Take out my little Hello Fall stamp. And just place that up there at the top. I think that's the spot I like it to be. Close that down. And I think what I'm going to do is use a brown. So I'm going to grab my First Fine Claire, it's called Acorn, and use that on my sentiment stamp. Oh, there we go. Get that off. Ink up my stamp real quick. And then we'll just get our sentiment on the card. There we go. Now that looks nice. And for the final touch that I would like to do, let me set my stamping platform out of the way again. I like to put a little frame around the edge. To me, that helps to draw the eye to the center. So I'm going to use the brushed corduroy and a dauber, just a very small little dauber. And what I'm going to do is just kind of go in little circles around the edge. just to do a nice little frame. There we go. It just kind of gives it a nice little bit of a distressed look. And that frame helps to draw the eye a little more towards the center. Get just a hair more down on the very bottom here. And now we're ready to go ahead and mount this onto the frame. So I will take my orange sheet out that I've cut out of the cardstock, flip this over, like I said, I like to use the running tape for the demonstrations because it goes a little faster, but you can use your paper glue. The ultra bond adhesive is really good to use. Alright, hopefully my head won't get in the way as I'm trying to center this, but get that centered onto our frame piece. And then our final step is to mount it onto our cardstock. This time I went ahead and chose to use the just a craft cardstock. Kind of give it that a little bit more of a fall appearance. And center that. And there we have our fun little Hello Fall card using the Sweet Poppies Pumpkins Stencil. Thank you so much for watching my video tutorial today. I hope you enjoy creating with the Sweet Poppy Pumpkin Stencil. And check out the Facebook page for more ideas using this stencil. And be sure to remember to check out the DaubelsDesigns.com website for more tutorials on the design team page. Have a great day.